Hello. I wanted to have a topical conversation about drugs in the UAE, particularly in light of Derrin Crawford and her recent arrest. Good morning. So, essentially, Detained in Dubai actually was founded through a man named Cat Le-Huy, who was my friend, is my friend. He was arrested in Dubai, and this is what led me to establish this organisation, because of the lack of justice that I saw and the lack of due process that I saw in that case. And it's something that's very important and close to home. So with Cat, he travelled to Dubai. He was arrested on allegations that he had specks of dust, well, essentially had specks of dust at the bottom of his bag, and they were alleged to be hashish. Now, it was those tests that returned that said it was something like 0.005 grams of hashish at the bottom of his bag. And then it was tested again, and it would come back with a different result, 0.5, 0.005, or sometimes even 1.5. So these test results were returning completely inaccurate results. And then a urine test returned with, again, 0.05 grams of hashish in the body, which in itself is a crime, even if those drugs were taken outside of the country. However, what was bizarre about that is that, Kat advised me that no, he had not consumed any hashish. And the tests of all of the other inmates in the facility returned the exact same amount of hashish in their body. So at that point, one has to question, well, obviously this is fabricated evidence, or something's going on here. And it turned out through investigations that in fact the police and prosecutors were financially incentivized to make successful drug arrests and prosecutions. And that was extremely concerning. But after a 7-week campaign, fortunately, Cat Le-Huy was acquitted of the charges and returned to the UK. Now, I thought that this must have been an isolated incident, that he was extremely unlucky, but that wasn't the case, because over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, we continued to receive requests through the website we developed for Cat. We continued to receive requests from other people who were in similar situations, whether it was drugs or some other type of false allegation or arrest that was based on perhaps incorrect evidence. So it was then that we founded the organisation Detained in Dubai, and since then the drugs issue has been ongoing, and it's been very interesting to see. Shortly after Cat Le-Huy's return home, we saw another kind of unbelievable case of a man who was arrested for having poppy seeds on the bottom of his shoe. And to anyone, they would think that's unbelievable, that it couldn't happen, that it must be a mistake. But of course, on investigation, yes, it happened. Someone was arrested because they had leftover poppy seeds from a bread roll that they'd had at the Heathrow airport on the way to Dubai. Now, of course, this is a new country as far as tourism is concerned, and they hadn't established any protocols for dealing with tourism. So when they found a case like this, a poppy seed, they prosecuted first and thought second about the ramifications, and only in a reactive sense. So case after case of these arrests for the most ludicrous of reasons, poppy seeds, codeine in the blood, in the bloodstream from someone who needed codeine for their chronic back pain. These are all prescription medicines that people were later arrested for, and that hit the international media. If they didn't hit the international media at that point, they were they were facing years in prison. And it was only the cases that did hit the international media that actually were returned home, but only after several months in prison, sometimes longer. Particularly the lady who was arrested for codeine in her system from her chronic back pain had to suffer an incredible amount of time in prison, but she was in chronic pain as well. They wouldn't allow her prescription medicine. So there she was, detained in a foreign country, in an Arabic-speaking country, not knowing why on earth she's been imprisoned for what is a prescription medicine. And she suffered greatly during that time. And she's not the first one or the last one to be arrested for having codeine in her system and travelling with a prescription. So this has been a repeat error on that the UAE has made. And they don't even really warn tourists about it. There's no questioning at the airport. If someone heads up to the Emirates flight desk, they're asked, are you carrying a knife, a bomb, aerosol can? But they're never asked, do you have prescription medicines? Are you carrying anything, and produce a list? And that is quite likely because the UAE doesn't even necessarily know what they've banned in their own country. We recently actually approached the embassy and asked them to clarify exactly what medicines are illegal. And we couldn't get a clear answer out of the embassy, and we still haven't been able to this date. So we couldn't even warn people exactly what is forbidden in the country, and this is obviously a lack of planning on the UAE side that has led to people being in prison for months on end. Following the codeine arrest, we saw Perry Coppins, who was a British veteran. He was arrested for having, again, prescription medicine. And he required that prescription medicine because he was going out to sea, and he required more than he would usually have if he were just staying in the UAE. However, he was arrested and jailed in Abu Dhabi, and after a long campaign, or a short campaign actually, he was finally released. Perry Coppins has suffered greatly on that, and has served almost as a warning to many veterans who live in the UAE or visit there. It's astonishing that someone who was just passing through the country really, and who had a prescription for the medicines that he was taking, and he was clearly not selling them, they were for personal use. He was going to be out at sea for months. So where is the common sense in having arrested him and sort of creating a media storm that didn't have to be there? Perry Coppins hit the international media all over England. He was prominent, he was on radio, television, the case was huge. So why did Abu Dhabi do that over a prescription medicine? I mean, these are the kind of common sense laws that they haven't updated yet, that they arbitrarily enforce, that some people are arrested, some people are not. It depends on the mood of the enforcement agent at the time. It depends on the location, whether it's Dubai or Abu Dhabi, or perhaps it depends on whether a particular police officer wants to impress his boss that week. Then we look at more serious allegations of selling drugs or possession of marijuana, possession of cocaine. Now, we've seen that a lot. And of course, not everyone's innocent. We're going to see some people who have got caught up in the drugs industry, as it were, and we see them on shows like Banged Up Abroad, and we see them, years later regretful in having made those decisions, and some of them have even lost their lives. But we're not talking about those people who are guilty at this point. We're talking about those people who might know them or might know someone who knows them, and they get caught up in what is a very wide net that's been cast by the UAE police. So, for example, if they think there's some drugs, or organised drug selling going on in Dubai, they will watch them for a very long time. They will conduct a sting operation. They will get some witnesses and tip-offs from various parties. And then they won't just arrest those people that they have tip-offs about, they'll arrest them and anyone who happens to be in their contacts list on their phone. Anyone who's been in contact with them, perhaps they've been at a party, perhaps they've gone out to dinner with someone. And these people who are involved in drugs, they can be normal people that you would meet in a day-to-day situation. and a lot of people are going to be friends with them or know them. They could be socialites, and those people can also face arrest. We had veteran Andy Neal, who was accused of being involved with drugs as well, that he was selling and promoting, and that he was in possession of. Andy was detained initially in Dubai, and there was a witness who had given a statement against him allegedly, but that witness clarified that no, Andy Neal was not the person that I gave you evidence about. You've got the wrong person. I was talking about someone else. But the police didn't take that into account. They had Andy and they wanted to keep him. The police have been quite negligent with their investigation. In fact, that they had let the person that they were truly after, which was the promoter of the drugs, the selling in the network, they had actually let that person leave the country. So now they're in the position of having essentially egg on their face. They had arrested an innocent British national, a veteran, a family man who had nothing to do with anything. They had no evidence against him, but they'd mistreated him. They'd been violent towards him during the arrest. And they didn't know how to wipe their hands of this issue. They'd been criticised heavily in the media, the Dubai police, for their negligence in this matter. So rather than releasing Andy and concluding their investigation, they decided to palm him off to Abu Dhabi police to start the whole process again, even though they knew clearly that he was innocent by this time. And unfortunately, Andy Neal had to start the whole process again. He was in prison for around about a year's time until he was finally and formally acquitted. Now, it was obviously, he's a PTSD sufferer, he's a veteran, he's served in the armed forces for a long time. It was an extremely stressful situation for him. And not only that, between him and another American who was arrested in almost exact situation, but his case was kept quiet. In these situations, what we see is the police and the prison guards scaring the subjects as well, telling them that if they go and talk to the embassy, that they're going to be kept in prison later. They say that if you go public, if you go to the media, we're going to make sure that your conditions in this prison are terrible, that you're not going to be allowed contact with your family, they won't be allowed to visit, we'll put you in solitary, and if you go to the media, you'll end up spending 10 years of your life. Now, that simply isn't the case, but these kind of rumours have been circulated for the past 10 years, and a lot of people believe them, which means that they're rotting in prison for much longer than they should be. And a lot of these innocent parties who don't go to the press or don't raise their case with the appropriate authorities, or even, some cases are so drastic that we want a United Nations ruling on them. But often these people who have been promised that if they keep quiet, the investigation will conclude, when they are promised that, they're going to keep quiet, and they are scared, they're afraid. And at that point, usually around 6 to 12 months later, after nothing has really happened in their investigation, after they've been stuck there for so long and they haven't seen anything change, the investigation's ongoing, they're starting again, they've got a new lead, there doesn't seem to be any possibility that they're ever going to be released, and that's when they finally give up and take some affirmative action on the matter. And that could be the press. It could be a whole realm of different approaches that we've used to help people. It could be liaising with the appropriate government personnel in their country, if it's a powerful country, that is. But eventually they do give up, and they do realise that they've been duped by authorities. They've been misled to thinking that being quiet, they'll be treated well and they'll get what they want, which is ultimately acquittal. And the problem with that is the police get what they want in that situation, because ultimately they will get a conviction. They don't need much evidence. They need one person's witness statement. And how do they get that witness statement? Again, through promises of a lenient sentence, and through coercion, and, well, as we know, through forced confessions. So this is what people are up against when they're charged with drugs. The other issue that I'd like to talk about is the stigma attached to a drug allegation. What I've noticed with several of my clients, as soon as you mention drugs, people think they must be guilty. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And this is something that we came across with Andy Neal when that particular story hit the media. Okay, it's a drug allegation. Yes, he's a veteran. Maybe he's doing this for some additional income, or even, family and friends. Obviously, the very close ones, they know what they're dealing with. But anyone outside of that immediate circle has doubts. And if you talk to a journalist, they're going to be wondering: is that person entirely innocent, or is there a possibility that they are involved? Now, certainly where there is smoke, there's fire, but we're usually looking in these particular cases in the wrong direction. There's going to be fire over here with law enforcement, with judicial process. There's going to be fire over here where someone has made an allegation so that they can quickly leave the country and allow you to take the fall. So this is the kind of thing that people don't realise. When there's a drugs allegation, where there's smoke, there's fire. No, I want people to start looking in all directions, not just at the person who's been arrested, because in the UAE, it's often an innocent person, as we've seen. And the cases with drugs that we've dealt with, we've seen fabricated evidence, falsified testimony, forced confessions, forced witness statements, that once those people have been released and free, admit that they were forced to sign these statements. Now, we've seen a Polish man, Artur Ligeska, and I'm actually going to invite him on to have a joint discussion. His case is very interesting. He, again, at the same time that Andy Neal was arrested, he also spent time in Abu Dhabi prison on falsified drug allegations. And fortunately, after a worldwide media campaign, he was freed. He's now written a book on his experience where he has suffered from some extreme brutality. And we have seen brutality. It doesn't happen all the time, and a lot of people will say that they never even saw it in certain prisons. But in other prisons, it is prevalent, and it does happen. So I'll be very interested to learn more about and share his story with you. He was ultimately acquitted, and he's back in Poland. So that's just another example of someone who has been locked up and acquitted, but after a year. Now, the other thing I'd like to talk about in relation to drugs cases in particular is that a drugs conviction is very serious. So if we have a UAE case and a conviction for drugs, and we've seen how easy it is for someone to be arrested and under suspicion or charged with a drugs-related offence, and we've seen in other cases that it is very easy to secure a conviction, that it can be done with a simple witness statement from someone else, and that witness statement is sufficient for that conviction. Now, drugs conviction is extremely serious. Now, let's say that person only does a year or two in prison and actually they're released earlier than the mandatory minimum 3-year sentence. Let's say they're an American citizen and there's diplomatic intervention and the UAE agrees to release them earlier. Now, that person returns to the United States, but they return with a drugs conviction. Now, that's very serious. That can have implications in other areas of their life, their employment, their ability to travel in the future to different countries. And the stigma, again, as I say, when it's drugs, the stigma attached with that means that they are going to have trouble travelling internationally in the future. And this is something that I think needs to be talked about, not at the government level, because on the one hand, we can't ignore law enforcement. We need it, and we do need to enforce breaches and violations in drug trafficking and selling, and obviously there are issues in the UAE on that level. However, we can't have people who are innocent receiving convictions in the UAE that are taken seriously outside of the country. And how do you differentiate between them? You can't. And that's why the international community and the international governments, the allies of the UAE, need to demand that certain minimum evidentiary requirements are met by the UAE before we can seriously take a conviction. The American citizens that have returned to the US who weren't found innocent but were released early from drug convictions, they do protest their innocence, and it's disturbing that they when they want to travel next, that they're concerned that when they're asked on the little form when they arrive in the UK, have you ever been convicted of a crime, they have to say yes, even though it's only the UAE. And the burden, the evidentiary burden, was absolutely ridiculous. They weren't allowed a translator in some cases, and the legal representation was cost prohibitive at $50,000 to $100,000 just to get a legal representative. Now, this is not the kind of conviction that we want to be writing into our visa applications, so that's something that certainly needs to be addressed. I suppose the other thing that I'd like to address is that within the police stations, we've received quite a number of reports recently and over the past couple of years that people who are being arrested are being targeted by scammers. So this whole arresting innocent people and arresting a wide network of innocent people, those people are going to want to go and hire lawyers. They're concerned they're in a foreign jurisdiction, they're in a foreign prison, they don't even speak the language and they're intimidated. So of course they're going to want legal help. So if you know that there's only 10 people involved in a drug network and you arrest 50 people, that's profitable for the system, that's profitable for the UAE, it's profitable for the legal community, but it's also a possibility for scammers to get involved. And what we've been hearing is reports that individuals and groups of people are going down to the police station hunting for British nationals, foreign nationals who might have money, and advising them that they're somehow involved in the Ministry of Interior or some other government body, and that they have a lot of sway within the authorities. And then those people are asking for substantial amounts of money from families abroad, and when they receive the money, they stop taking care of the customer and they're basically never heard from again. But that person who's been arrested, say on a false drug allegation or a false suspicion, is not taken seriously. They can't really complain about this scam. They're not in a position to do so, so they just lose. And this is something that's extremely concerning, and the reports are that they have a sort of working relationship with the police, so that's something that the UAE authorities should really investigate. So as far as drugs is concerned, I mean, at this stage, be careful. There's not much that you can do. Watch the company that you keep. Derrin Crawford was arrested simply for being an acquaintance of a new person she'd just met, and spending, I think she'd known him for 2 weeks or something and hardly seen him. She was arrested. We've seen Andy Neal arrested for having the telephone number of someone in his contacts list, who was a neighbour or something very distant. He didn't know him very well. So again, it's about the company you keep, or even that your friends keep. You have to be very careful. There's not much you can do in these instances, but what we hope for is raising this kind of awareness will lead to perhaps people like Derrin or Andy just being very careful of where they go and who they see, and if they do hear anything about any associations to drugs, just stay right clear. And beware of poppy seeds, I suppose. But anyway, we hope to see some improvements. Thank you for coming. I'm sorry I didn't get to answer you there. I saw you were scrolling. But thanks for joining me this morning. We'll know more about Derrin's situation shortly. She's still under investigation, and hopefully, if anything, she'll only be used as a witness. If she is used as a witness, she might be prohibited from leaving the country, which can drag on for some months. So, thank you very much, and hope to see you again soon. Have a good day.